The president wants this wrapped up. That he had been told by his lawyers, "Hey, don't worry, it'll be."
After a year, I would think anybody would.
Right. So how do you do that? That you sit down with the special counsel. The only concern is, and I've expressed it here on the couch, is that you can tell a fib in front of an adoring crowd, and they will cheer you. You tell a fib when you're talking to Robert Mueller or the FBI or investigators, and it's a felony, and you do have to be concerned about that, because you will never know what Mueller knows. Exactly. They will ask you leading questions, and you will walk into that trap. And it's something that his own attorneys have been concerned about. I'm talking about the president.
And speaking of that trap, look what happened to Michael Flynn. Byron York was reporting that James Comey, you would know better than me, James Comey went to congressional investigators and told them that the FBI agents who interviewed him did not think that he was lying. Yet, fast forward 9 months later, when Robert Mueller takes over, and then all of a sudden he's pleading guilty to, one count of perjury. So if I was the president, I would take heed looking at that specific instance and be very, very concerned and very, very cautious. And I certainly wouldn't talk to Robert Mueller and his team unless I absolutely had to. Why would you?
I mean, that's the thing.
Who cares about the optics? This is about something bigger.
The president may legally not have a choice to sit down, and politically also.
Why would
I'm saying if you can
not have a choice at this point?
He can be compelled. I don't think they want to legally compel him, but he can be. And President Clinton, there's a precedent for this, sitting down with the special counsel under oath. So, and there's also a political cost if he doesn't.
Who cares about the political optics on this one, though?
I think President Trump does. Here's the thing, though. It's only a perjury trap if the president doesn't tell the truth. And we know, as you said, sometimes he has a tendency to exaggerate, as many politicians do. But if he goes in there and tells the truth,
I'll put it the way that Judge Andrew Napolitano put. I think you'll appreciate this. He says that sometimes the president does not use an economy of words.
Yes.
And so you've got to pay close attention to what he's saying. But I think this whole idea, this preconception that the president, who has gone before heads of state now, who has gone before, for decades, CEOs and chairmen and women of the boards of many corporations, why are people so ready to believe that he can't handle 2 hours with Robert Mueller? It's just a straight question.
I think President Trump is a fighter. I think he knows in his heart that he didn't do anything, and he wants to get out there and tell that story to the world if he can. I do think that Mr. Manafort is in a bunch of trouble. I think they're not only looking at his situation, but his past dealings in Ukraine and those types of things. But that is different
in terms of this investigation, what's happening with Paul Manafort?
Well, when Donald Trump figured out...
Years before he joined the campaign.
Yeah, and look, when Donald Trump figured out what he was doing with Ukraine, he dumped him as his campaign chairman. He was there for 5 months. He was the chairman, but he left and exited the system, and so...
So should President Trump sit down with him?
Yes.
In your estimation?
I think there should be a limit to the scope. I think they should understand exactly what they're going to talk about in advance. If I was attorney, I don't know that I would let him do it, but he's the president. He's going to make this call himself. There'll be a lot of legal wrangling, and I think he really wants to do it. And if you're innocent, go out there and say that.
It's politically right for him to do an expedient, right, Dagan? I mean, when you look at the polls, people do think that the president should do this.
I think he does have to be careful. It's not that he can't comport himself in front of world leaders and business CEOs. It's the fact that he can be boastful and he can say things and exaggerate, and you can't do that in front of if you're testifying in front of a special counsel or talking to investigators.
Well, it's not like we've never seen this president, in a position where he exercises that sort of discipline. We have. He has had message discipline. Twitter,
It's not his natural tendency.
Let's dig in on this, switching gears a little bit, but staying on this topic. Meantime, one Republican congressman says the Mueller probe is dragging on, and he wants Attorney General Jeff Sessions to take action. Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida made the remarks in a recent interview. Listen.
I still think there's time for Jeff Sessions to do the right thing, to call in Bob Mueller and say, where are we? Is there evidence of collusion that justifies a continuation of the investigation? If there is, I think that 14 months into the Trump presidency, we should know it. And if there's not, then let's go ahead and wrap this thing up.
Well, he's recused himself, so he wouldn't be the one to do that, right? But it would be Rod Rosenstein who would do that, right?
I believe that recusal is not required under the law, and I believe it could be rescinded.
So should he rescind the recusal and fire Mueller, Jeff Sessions?
The fundamental problem is Jeff Sessions himself. I mean, the president appointed an attorney general who pretty much on day one recused himself. And as long as Jeff Sessions is the attorney general, this problem will continue because Rod Rosenstein is running the place. Jeff Sessions is there in name only.
But what about just the premise of it, though? So should, regardless of feelings about the attorney general, should he rescind his recusal and fire Mueller?
Look, I would argue that this should have never happened in the first place. It should have never been put into place. But to pull the plug, everybody will criticize that it happened prematurely. I think I'm more with Trey Gowdy on this one, who says you've got to let this thing play out. I hope Mr. Mueller feels the pressure and understands that this country has a lot of business to get onto. And if we're going to, you know, go after somebody for tax evasion, for somebody who, you know, was fired from a campaign, come on, let's get on with the business of the United States of America. If you don't have enough evidence, wrap it up and move on.
Well, Marie, what do you make of that? I mean, there hasn't, as we just found out, you know, he's not necessarily the subject here. So
well,
there hasn't been, or the subject,
right.
but so is it time to just wrap this thing up and move on?
I think Mueller is working quickly to do so. There's just a lot of moving parts here. And Congressman Gates only mentioned collusion. This special counsel is also investigating obstruction of justice. And that Washington Post story we started with today says that Bob Mueller is still very focused on that. So I think, you know, you've heard from Trey Gowdy, Lindsey Graham, there will be an outcry among Republicans in Congress if Bob Mueller's fired. It will not just look bad politically for a president who says he didn't do anything wrong and he has nothing to hide, but I do not think the president should or will do this, particularly putting a wedge between him and Congress at a very delicate time before the midterms.
This idea from Gates is so bad, it's almost like he's trying to goad President Trump into doing it. That's how bad it is.
Yes.
It raises the question of, I always, as a business reporter, I always ask, what about the taxpayer money that's been spent? I think that in the Mueller team, in just the first few months, like 4.5, 5 months, they were spending about $1.5 million per month on this. So what happens if Mueller got fired? There's going to be another special counsel. Why doesn't Jeff Sessions fire himself? Unfortunately, the only thing that can't happen is you would never get another AG through the approval process.
I do think they can get another attorney general.
You do?
And they need to do it. Look, President Trump is still the president for years to come. So you've got to get somebody in place who doesn't recuse himself from the fundamental job that he's supposed to do. They have major systemic problems in the FBI. You need somebody to take that by the reins. And Jeff Sessions has said, I'm not the person to do this. I'm going to let Rod Rosenstein do it.
All right, I'm going to break in with breaking news right now. We're going to go to that San Bruno, California police update with the police chief there. We are learning about the suspect's footsteps before the YouTube mass shooting. Let's watch and listen.
Vehicle to the rear of a neighboring business and access the campus via a parking garage. The suspect's vehicle has been secured and is expected to be processed over the course of the next few days. Investigators will also be working to gain access to and review all social media related posts associated with the suspect in an effort to further comprehend the motive for this crime. At this point in the investigation, it is believed that the suspect was upset with policies and practices of YouTube. This appears to be the motive of for this incident. I'd very much like to thank and recognize the numerous local and federal agencies who provided assistance in managing this incident. YouTube's response to this critical incident was also extraordinary. They were extremely prepared to offer services to all of their employees in a swift and timely manner. This would have been much more challenging for us without all of their assistance. Finally, I'd like to mention how proud I am of the San Bruno police officers, especially those who were first on scene. Not only the timeliness of their response, but the actions they took as they responded significantly limited the window of time available to the suspect to cause harm to additional victims. Our department has worked to be as open and transparent as possible in sharing information regarding this incident, and will continue to strive to do that. However, from this point forward, the investigation is expected to be very deliberate and methodical. I do not anticipate having additional information in the immediate future to share. When we do develop additional information, we'll let you know, and we will distribute that. So with that, before addressing any questions, I'd like to introduce the Fire Chief, Dave Cresta, to summarize and describe the fire and EMS response to this incident. Chief?
Good morning, as a chief.
All right, so the police chief in San Bruno, California, giving a timeline before we saw this, and then a pertinent detail on all of this. apparently there's an indication of why this woman, Nasim Agdam, would have done this shooting at YouTube yesterday. Apparently she had problems with the policy at YouTube about posting things, and that she felt like she was being suppressed. Now, we knew that little nugget, but we had not had it confirmed by officials. She was upset that YouTube was not allowing her apparently to do what she wanted to do on the platform per its policies. And she used a pseudonym, a different last name, and they have located that account. So that may be where some of this is coming from, reports of that earlier. 3 people wounded. She killed herself, according to police. This is San Bruno, California. As we continue to get more information, we'll bring it to you live from there. Meanwhile, Democrat officials across the nation are now suing to block the Trump administration from adding a citizenship question to the 2020 United States Census. Boy, we've been talking about this for a while. Whether the lawsuit carries any weight, we'll talk more. And President Trump says, quote, strong action is coming today to enhance enforcement of our nation's southern border until his long-promised border wall is built. What we can expect to hear from the commander-in-chief. Stay close.
President Trump gearing up to crack down on border security until his long-promised wall between the United States and Mexico is completed. The commander-in-chief tweeting this morning this, quote, our border laws are very weak while those of Mexico and Canada are very strong. Congress must change these Obama-era and other laws now. The Democrats stand in our way. They want people to pour into our country unchecked. Crime. We will be taking strong action today. That announcement comes one day after the president said this.
Until we can have a wall and proper security, we're going to be guarding our border with the military. That's a big step. We really haven't done that before, or certainly not very much before. We need the wall, we need the protection, and we have to change our immigration laws at the border and elsewhere.
Lawmakers on both sides of the political aisle reacting to those remarks. Here's GOP Congressman Francis Rooney.
The bigger question, is it a good idea to escalate the tensions unnecessarily?
And you don't think it's a good idea, at least right now, right?
I would rather have the dealings with immigration be handled in a civil context and not a military one.
But the idea of deploying the National Guard to help enforce the border is not new. President Barack Obama deployed 1,200 troops to do the job back in 2010. President George W. Bush dispatched 6,000 back in 2006. Jason, what is the president talking about? What else should Congress do, you think?
I think the president is doing absolutely the right thing. I think there should have been a wall. I don't think that Congress should have authorized and passed a funding bill, nor should the president have signed a bill without the $25 billion that he needed to build the wall. But I do think the troops is good. And you know what? There's not enough focus. Since 2016, there are more than 100,000 unaccompanied children that have come across the border, and then we hand them out without doing the proper vetting to people who are gang related, and who knows, I'm sure there's some really good people who take these people in, but you've got 100,000 kids coming across the border and they're given out to who knows who. Where is the cry for these kids that are maybe 8, 9, 10 years old?
Well, there was a huge cry a couple of summers ago, if you remember, where, you know, the number 100,000 was like 90 in one summer. Do you remember that?
Yeah. But
so
since 2016...
It's supposed to be a relative or someone close in this country who would take that child. The problem that we found out in detention-type situations while they figured out where to put them, which is what you're talking about this, is that things can happen to those children. And so, you know, with our hearts, we can lead on this issue as a nation. My question goes deeper than that, though. And I don't, you know, this is going to offend a lot of people. But we have some corruption south of our border in some governments. Why don't they put forth policies that get their own citizens to want to stay more?
Well, that has
I understand wanting to go north. I get it. But in this term of like a wave of people, why don't those governments do more to make their citizens thirsty for their type of life?
And that actually, and Lisa, get in here, but that actually has resulted in fewer border apprehensions. Or is it this president's No,
policies and his bravado about the matter.
Border apprehensions peaked at 1.6 million back in 2000. Last year they fell to 310,000.
You think it's because people want to stay in those countries more?
I think that a better economy helps. So again, the better the economy is in Mexico, the more people are likely to stay in those countries.
Coming across the border about that one.
But I also think at some point as a country, and Congress needs to make this decision as well, do our laws matter? Are we a nation of laws? Are we a nation that follows our laws? Or are we a nation that enforces the laws? Or are they irrelevant? And that's going to be the differentiating factor as well of, do we have increases in influx along the border of illegality as well? Because if these individuals coming from some of these Central American countries, if they know that our laws are essentially irrelevant and we don't respect our own laws, then there's going to be an increase of individuals that are wanting to come to this country and take advantage of the fact that we don't follow those laws and those laws don't mean anything. So it's a really simple, basic question that we need to ask ourselves. And it seems to me that many on the left, the answer to them is no. Our laws don't matter. We don't want to be a nation of laws.
We should point out that the troops that were deployed under Bush and Obama, they were barred from law enforcement activities, that they were actually just working to help repair equipment, monitor surveillance cameras and sensors. They were support, but necessary and seen as necessary under the past two presidents.
Right. And I think the question is, how does Donald Trump want to use any military resources he sends there? Right? Is it to do what Barack Obama did and George W. Bush did, or is it something new? We don't know the answer to that yet. It's hard not to see this announcement in the context of his overall rhetoric on the border and immigration. It's also hard when I hear you say that Congress should spend $25 billion on the wall. First of all, Donald Trump as a candidate promised us as voters that Mexico would pay for it. Now, some of us thought that was never realistic, but he said it. And I don't know why American taxpayers should be on the hook for something that we could accomplish with much less money, with border wall in some locations, overhead surveillance in others.
You talked about a wall system to echo exactly what you're talking about.
Do you want to talk about the financial burden? It's those illegal immigrants being in this country, and we are required under a Supreme Court decision to educate all of those illegal immigrant children. And in some communities, it's a huge financial burden.
Well, and what you were talking about, Congressman, the moral burden of it all with regard to the children as well.
Yeah, people say, oh, it's more compassionate to do that. No, it's not. Stop sending the signals that you win the lottery by coming to the United States of America. Tell them you're not going to get across this border. You can't do it.
Thank you. The White House signaling today it may be looking to pull U.S. troops out of Syria, with ISIS being almost completely destroyed. But now lawmakers warning that such a move would create big dangers. We'll debate it. Plus, China hitting back today amid a growing showdown with the United States over trade. So is President Trump making the right move with recent tariffs? Or does this risk an all-out trade war?
News alert, the White House today is signaling that it's looking at withdrawing U.S. troops from Syria, saying the military mission to eradicate ISIS in Syria is coming to, quote, a rapid end, with the terror group almost completely destroyed. But the White House statement offers no definitive timeline and says the U.S. will continue to, quote, consult with our allies and friends regarding future plans. Here's what President Trump said yesterday.
I want to get out. I want to bring our troops back home. I want to start rebuilding our nation. It's time. We were very successful against ISIS. We'll be successful against anybody militarily. But sometimes it's time to come back home. And we're thinking about that very seriously.
The remarks followed the same day officials from both the Pentagon and State Department said the U.S. mission in Syria is not over. Some lawmakers have been voicing concern that pulling out now would allow ISIS to regroup. Earlier today, a military expert.
Our allies in the region, particularly the Kurds and the Arabs that are finishing the fight to ISIS, and the Iranians, need to hear that America is resolved and America is resolute and is not going to abandon them. If we completely leave, we will have ISIS 3.0. They will begin plotting attacks and launching attacks into Europe and the United States.
So military experts that I've talked with, including Colonel Walt, say that the problem with this is that they were seen as JV for so long that they amassed in 14 different countries. And we may have them on the run there, but what does the footprint really look like? We took out Raqqa, their stronghold in Syria.
No, this is a huge problem. There's no simple, easy answer. I think the president's heart is in the right place. I do believe your military, you go in, you use everything with overwhelming force, you fight, and then you win, and you come home. What has not yet been defined is what is victory. And I look
Against
at
ISIS.
against ISIS, but you look at 17 years or so in Afghanistan. What is victory there? I mean, we have people that are continued there in perpetuity.
ISIS is there too, by the way.
And I also worry about northern Africa. You look at the vacuum that's in Libya, there's a major, major problem. And so we have to have the biggest, baddest military on the face of the planet, and we do. But you also have to have great intelligence. And you're sending people into very difficult situations. I understand where the president says, you know, he wants to bring them home, but we're still going to have to fight and have good people doing hard things.
So it's interesting, Lisa, that the congressman is using the word heart, because the president is talking about something different, pocketbook.
Well, yeah, but I think it's a combination of a bunch of things. And I think the difficulty here is kind of like with North Korea, where there doesn't seem to be any good answers, right? I mean, there's no good solution here because all of them could potentially lead to, you know, a more dangerous environment. And I also believe it's not just ISIS that we're worried about as well. It's also bad actors like Iran and Russia. And the national defense strategy that was laid out by the Pentagon, I believe it was in January, identified the fact that over the past decade, our focus on counterterrorism has essentially emboldened these interstate strategic competitors like Russia and Iran. So it's also a question of that, which leads to as well just this really complex and difficult situation that I feel like we're dealing with right now.
A situation where Russia becomes stronger if we pull out of Syria in that particular conflict?
I'm going to take your question and turn to Marie.
I think a lot
Can
of
I just
people
add, though,
do think that's
you mentioned Iran. Guess who's awash in money because of the Iranian nuclear deal that we inked? So again, to keep at least some troops in Syria as a counterweight to the growing influence of Iran.
When it comes to Syria, yes, Russia and Iran will be the two countries mainly that fill a power vacuum if and when the United States leaves. And Syria, as Lisa said, is more than about ISIS, right? We have to define what American interests are there. It is about defeating ISIS, which is not done yet, and we should not bring our troops home until that's completed. It's also about a key country in the Middle East that is awash in a civil war that has Russian and Iranian troops, intel, and money all over it. And if we pull out, our adversaries will come in. And that is a strategic problem in the heart of the Middle East.
So, Congressman, though, there's a fine line between staying and getting the job done, which my brain almost broke, because I remember a time when you were on a team, Marie, that saw this as a JV. So I think
we're also the ones that put the strategy in place that has led to the defeat of ISIS.
I get that, and I see. So. I was going to say I think we've seen some evolution in terms of fighting what I call the Islamic State savages in this case. But there's a fine line between doing the job that Marie is talking about and occupying. Where are we?
Right.
The caliphate is based on the occupation of land. And when you have this vacuum of the military, the United States military pulling back, you don't have the leadership, the expertise, and the intelligence to be able to control that territory. That's the problem. And so it was surprising, I think, what Donald Trump said. But again, I think his heart is in the right place, but we got to be very careful.
I want to ask you, Dagan, because you brought up this idea of, you know, what it would look like for Iran and Russia in terms of filling the void there. Do we, as the congressman is saying, do we need to remain on the ground just to keep intelligence-wise that from happening?
Some people think that in terms of a necessary counterweight to be on the ground, because again, Iran, it's not just Iran funded by Russia's oil money. It is Iran funded by money we essentially handed them as part of the nuclear deal. And I just want to remind people of what happened with Iraq. When Barack Obama declared victory, if you will, and withdrew from Iraq, that gave rise to ISIS. So if it's not even the Islamic State, it could be another terrorist organization.
It's also important to point out that under the Trump administration, we've seen an escalation and a decrease of ISIS's foothold exponentially under the Trump administration, because he's empowered our commanders on the ground to make decisions in a way that President Obama did not. So the numbers have changed very significantly. So the numbers have changed very significantly under the Trump administration.
Well, let's see if President Trump listens to his military leaders now.
Right.
Plenty of people are not in agreement with him.
They don't want to leave.
All right, we'll move on. China retaliating with new tariffs on scores of U.S. products. Less than 24 hours after President Trump unveiled a list of Chinese imports that he aims to target. The effect on the markets, as some worry, we are seeing a widening trade war. I'm so glad you're here, Dagan, from FBN.
Because I'm a nerd.
No!
You're not.
Smart.
isn't cutting it. Congressman, I thought that the approach to this, particularly starting with the steel and the aluminum tariffs and then making exceptions to them, has been ham-handed and haphazard. However, the approach with China, there is a method to this madness because you don't know that these tariffs will ever be put in place. There's going to be a long period. And the language that you heard from Larry Kudlow, he talks about opening markets and lowering barriers. And that is exactly why the market turned around. Because, again, he's talking about how this is going to benefit both nations and both economies.
Well, President Trump is right. There has been an imbalance for a long time. $500 billion is a big just an annual deficit. And then you look on top of that, the intellectual theft and the markets in which the United States companies can't even play in China. There are several sectors we can't even do that. So I think the president has the president of China's attention now at this point, and I do think we're just asking for parity, just asking to get a bit of balance in place. I don't see it as an all-out war where each side is going nuclear on their tariffs, but I do think that there should be a balance in this country. And I think Congressman Walz is just absolutely wrong because the status quo is just not an even playing field.
I just want President Trump to be as angry, if not angrier, about our national debt and our budget deficits as opposed to the trade deficit.
High five to you on that one. Yes, I agree.
But again, this is not just economic retaliation by China. It's also political, because if you look at the states, the biggest soybean and hog producing states in this country, President Trump won 8 out of 10 of them. So you go after those states who backed him and you try to inflict the most economic pain there. That's what China's doing. But I do want to point out that these tariffs may never be imposed by the two sides. It depends on how they work out.
Exactly. And I think we're sort of seeing the art of the deal, the dance of the deal right now happening between these two countries. I like Harris to this show.
It is a dance.
And we had Larry Lindsey, who's a former economic advisor for George W. Bush, said that this is the most willing he has ever seen China be willing to negotiate. And so I think that's what President Trump is doing. And he's also doing this with Mexico and Canada on NAFTA as well. And so I think he's laying down this marker, trying to get some concessions. And is this a good idea or not? Well, we will only know if he extracts concessions.
Look, this sends the same kind of message the president sent with those Tomahawk missiles in Syria and other things that he's done militarily. Now he's ending it economically. If you have to sit down across from President Trump to negotiate NAFTA, pay attention to what's happening right now with China. And we are going to see our markets fluctuate because we're doing something we haven't done before. But a lot of analysts are saying exactly what Dagan is, and they're not all at Fox Business, by the way. They're all over the place. This is the kind of thing that you have to go through if you want to push for change. Otherwise, we can just stay with a $500 billion deficit.
But there are a lot
Do we like that?
But there are a lot of farmers and manufacturers who are wringing their hands and biting their nails, living through this kind of uncertainty, including ginseng growers in Wausau, Wisconsin.
Right.
Because, again, they got hit. More than a dozen states, led by New York's Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, suing to block the Trump administration from including a citizenship question on the 2020 U.S. Census. Can they actually pull this off? We debate.
A coalition of 17 states, Washington, D.C., and 6 major cities is now suing to block the Trump administration from adding a U.S. citizenship question to the 2020 census. It would be the first time the short-form census asked such a question since 1950. New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman is the one spearheading the lawsuit, and he says the citizenship question could actually cause an inaccurate population count that could hurt certain states.
Census officials have said very clearly that simply asking about immigration status will create an environment of fear and mistrust in immigrant communities, communities of color, and from the census, in the language of Article 1, a full enumeration of all persons in every state, we determine how many representatives each state has, how many votes you have in the Electoral College, and how to distribute hundreds of billions of dollars in federal funds.
Congressman, we talked about this earlier in the week, and I'll come to you on this first. We talked about how the point of the census is actually to do a count of everyone in the country by the Constitution. And there are some experts who worry this could depress turnout and lead to an inaccurate count. What's your take on it?
I think he should ask this question. I don't think the Democrats will prevail in trying to get it off. There is historical precedent for doing it. We're in the midst of a financial discussion in this country about how to deal with millions of people that are here illegally. We have no idea. Is that number 9 million? Is it 14 million? Why not ask that question? Because somebody might be offended? This is not an exercise in being politically correct. It's an exercise in understanding the demographics of what's going on in this country. And all this flailing, all this, why not take the oxygen that they're using to scare people and say they won't actually use this and turn it over to ICE? Everybody should fill it out, and it's safe to do so.
Well, Harris, I think that's part of the question is there is a fear right now because of some of the Trump administration rhetoric of how this data will be used.
That's what's driving the fear.
Well, it's driving some of it, they say.
Where politicians go and they try to, not you ever, but where some politicians go and they try to figure out which, aspect of something that they want to fight, not based on fact. Here's some facts. You don't have to answer every question on the census, but when you answer it, you better be honest because they can prosecute you if you lie. The only question that they expect you to answer is how many people you have in your house. It's 40 pages long. I'm not reading 40 pages. You're not reading 40 pages. There are going to be a lot of things on that census guide that you're not going to answer. Just tell the truth. Skip the ones you don't want to have.
Something
That's what lawyers are saying.
Here's something, and by the way, I know this firsthand. This isn't a political talking point. Census Bureau workers, because I was in the household survey used to calculate the unemployment rate years ago, and the census worker who showed up at my apartment was telling me it's very hard to count immigrants in this country, even legal immigrants, because they will never open the door. Right. So that it is an issue, and it has been an issue for years and years. But the Trump administration is planning to mine immigration, Social Security, and other state and federal records to check the accuracy of how you fill out your census form.
Tell the truth.
How much money are you going to spend on this, and how accurate is it going to be in the end if that's what they're planning to do?
The biggest problem with the census is they're planning to do a lot of this on the internet and using electronic machines. What could possibly go wrong by doing this?
Will the legal challenges be wrapped up by the time this happens, or will it be a moot point?
Not sure, but I do think that we should just come to grips with the fact that anything with the Trump administration having to do with immigration is going to cause massive uproar from the mainstream media and the left, and is also going to invoke lawsuits. Look at any action the president has taken on immigration, even the most basic ones that have historical precedent, and it is going to cause this uproar. You also, the concern about non-participation, though, you can look at other questionnaires like the American Community Service questionnaire that does ask the question, and I think the response rate is like 97% or exceeds that. So I don't necessarily think that's a valid concern.
This is the surprise. This is more breaking news.
Oh, my goodness.
Harris Faulkner has a brand new book coming out, and we're getting a sneak peek at the cover. It's called 9 Rules of Engagement, A Military Brat's Guide to Life and Success.
You and I will make each other cry over this.
You talked to your dad for this book.
I did. I interviewed somebody that I thought I knew so well, and I learned who I am through those interviews. These are his war stories. And now I know why I drive everybody crazy with my 9 rules in my life, because I do have incredible discipline, and it comes from the way that I was raised by my mom and my dad. This book is special to me because it is a way to win at life that I now can tell everybody, and I know it works. It is rooted in my faith. It is rooted in things that are more secular about how we negotiate things, about how we get not what we deserve in life, but what we do negotiate and believe in. It's about devising a mission for your life's dreams, for your children. I'm really, really proud to have interviewed the people who are in this book. It's changed my world, and I hope that it will change others.
Well, I know you speak so highly of your father. Can you give us a sneak peek of one of the 9 rules?
Yeah.
Oh, of course, yeah. So special forces, those people who are in your squad, your inner circle, I'm a big believer in looking at that once a year and figuring out if you have the real people around you who will lift you up. We have plenty of people, some of them are relatives, who don't do that for us. They gossip, bring us down, they work against us. Sometimes we don't even realize it's happening. But when you are in a battlefield situation, you need people who are going to watch your 6, your backside, as we say in the military, and those who trust that you will do the same for them. I mean, I'm the kind of girl I hope that people know you could take me into a foxhole, no pun intended, and I got you. And that's how I was raised. Your special forces, your inner circle. Some people need to renovate their squad.
And when can people get it? When's it available?
June 5th, but pre-order right now. Right now on Amazon.
So happy for
So
you,
thank
Harris.
you guys. You blessed me.
Can't even read it.
Hey, Harris, I love you.
I love you. It's Hug a News Anchor Day today, too.
How do you
So I'll
know
hug you
that?
during the commercial.
I am one lucky guy.
We'll be right back.